I am live, I am live. I have finished Life as Carola, written by Joan Grant, and it was quite a tough book in parts. It's quite a brutal life in the 16th century as a poor girl. Here is now a book entitled Time Out of Mind, and it is about Joan Grant's life itself. It was first published in 1956, and here is another picture of her again. And I have decided to read it because I have read it many years ago, but I think I want to read it again. It is for Gillian, 1930, Nicola, 1952, and Jonathan, 1954. And it is a book about her life. Chapter 1, Part 1, Travelling Incognito, I guess. I was conceived in the Blue Grotto at Capri in June 1906. Now that's funny because in Life as Carola it was said that she was born 1907. I should have read this first, shouldn't I? I didn't remember. So, in June 1906, 2 months before this event, so exceedingly commonplace except for its locale, Jack and Blanche Marshall had embarked on a motor tour through France and Italy. It was not their first motor tour abroad, for in the previous autumn they had taken Marjorie and Iris, Blanche's daughters, by her first marriage, from Cherbourg to Boulogne. Neither of the children, packed into the back of the car, which was open like a dog cart, with Kate Saunders, the lady's maid, and all the luggage, had enjoyed the trip. Iris, who was then 7, remembers praying for punctures so that she could collect windfalls from roadside apple trees, which were the only bit of France she could see from her seat hinged to the door. Marjorie, aged 13, quarrelled with Kate, who was car sick. So everyone was relieved when it was decided they should not come in the new 24 HP Renault, a 24 horsepower Renault, but instead go to a seaside lodgings at Aberdovi. This trip to extend far beyond the convenient escape routes of the Channel ports was planned with a care worthy of a safari into darkest Africa. Petrol in cans, spare parts and tyres had to be sent ahead to establish supply dumps along the route, and knowing Blanche's idea of the amount of luggage required for a weekend, there must have been times when Jack regretted the lack of a string of porters. The law which required that a horseless carriage be preceded by a man with a red flag had recently been repealed, but children and livestock had yet not learned even the rudiments of self-preservation from motors. So Blanche, swathed in dust coat and veils, armed herself with a bugle on which she tooted to give warning of their approach. The most careful forethought could not always overcome the mechanical frailties of the Renault, and often they were night-bound in remote villages where fleas abounded and the primitive sanitation appealed Blanche's sensibilities. She sprinkled Keatings with a lavish hand, and with the optimism of a female Hercules faced with the Augean stables, decided it was her duty to make at least a dent in the indifference to hygiene shown by the Latin races. No one except Blanche, and she claims to have forgotten, knows why she decided that her first task was to educate the children to blow their noses. To this end, she purchased quantities of cheap cotton handkerchiefs and flung them graciously to the populace, who probably thought her fanfares heralded the arrival of a circus. Disappointed that most of these tributes to Hygeia fell neglected in the dust or were carried away on the wind, she wrapped each one carefully round a petal so as to achieve a more accurate aim. It was a time when the English were still a fruitful source of largesse, and the delighted cheers of her audience soon turned to angry mutterings, when instead of receiving sweets or coins, they imagined themselves to be the victims of an obscure practical joke. But Blanche does not easily relinquish an idea, and in spite of her husband's anguished protests, she continued to replenish her stock, until, on at least one occasion, Jack only just managed to keep the car a short head in front of a field of foreigners, enraged and armed with pitchforks. The pace became more gentle in Italy, although there were minor crises, such as when Jack refused to stop to pick up Blanche's favourite picture hat, which had blown off when they were bowling along after a frustrating series of punctures. In Florence, they had arranged to meet Sybil Westmoreland, who was touring in a Delano Belleville with her maid and chauffeur, and they proceeded in convoy with her until they came to Sorrento. Here, the three of them were most favourably impressed by the excellent service in the hotel. Before they had been in their rooms an hour, an abundance of flowers arrived with the compliments of the management. The food was superb, and the staff almost embarrassingly obsequious. None of them was particularly surprised by this solicitude, and had they been, it is unlikely that they would have thought of questioning Sybil's chauffeur. This excellent man, well aware that his status in the staff dining room depended upon the rank of his employer, and doubtful if his personal conviction that an English countess outranked even the most grandiose of foreign titles, was accepted abroad, had secured his comfort by a tactful interchange with the hall porter. When asked what rank was indicated by the coronet on the door of the Delano Belleville, he had replied with a conspiratorial wink, "Sorry, cock, can't tell you. We're travelling incog." The following morning, Sybil, who in due course would become my godmother, decided to spend a lazy day recovering from the fatigues of the journey. Perhaps Blanche would have liked to do so too, but her husband was an indefatigable sightseer. Together they took the boat to Capri. She's an exceedingly bad sailor, but fortunately it was calm, blue day, for otherwise I doubt if he could have persuaded her to board the little steamer. On disembarking, they found the quay lined with militia in full dress, complete with band. Jack, not wishing to miss an attraction which had been omitted from Baedeker, approached the officer in charge of these gleaming ranks on the pretext of asking for a light for his cigar. The officer was not only obliging but effusive, so Jack inquired in stilted Italian, which must unwittingly have indicated annoyance, "What is the reason for this display?" Instantly the captain's confidence, which until then had been as glossy as the cock's feathers in his hat, began to droop. A voluble Italian tide bore on his flood a flood seam of words that Jack could comprehend. Improbable as it seemed, there was no doubt that the man was imploring his forgiveness for an excess of zeal which had caused a flagrant disregard of their desire to remain incognito. It was a devilish awkward situation. Ought he to carry it off? But if he did, and the august persons for whom they had been mistaken arrived on the next boat? The Italian's limpid eyes seemed to brim over in a freshet of tears. To an Englishman, anything, even the risk of being incarcerated in a foreign gaol on a charge of false pretences, was better than being involved in a public display of lachrymose emotion. "The incident shall be forgotten," said Jack hastily, and as this did not seem enough to restore calm, added, "Forgotten except as yet another example of the courtesy shown to us by the loyal people of Italy. As a further boon, he offered a cigar, which the now radiant captain stowed carefully away in a pocket of his splendid uniform, saying that it would be a relic treasured by his children and his children's children. There was no holding him now. What could he do to show his gratitude? Mules were waiting to convey them to a villa of Tiberius, but would they prefer horses? His own charger, for instance, an animal of spirit. Jack knew that Blanche would refuse to mount even the most placid donkey. He had meant to leave her for a siesta in a hotel and go alone to the Roman villas, but he dared not risk her unwittingly giving them away. He must keep her under his eye until they could escape from the island. But how and where? He thought rapidly, came to a tactful and, for me, momentous conclusion. We wish to go to the Blue Grotto, alone. You will understand that we sometimes grow weary of being stared at. He made his voice a shade peremptory. The ordinary tourist can visit the grotto some other day. As if at a flick of the captain's fingers, 2 NCOs leapt from the ranks, seized the picnic hamper, the cushions, the rug, and marched briskly off with them towards the landing steps. I shall myself be your courier, exclaimed the officer delightedly. Sentries I shall post to see that you are not disturbed, the cream of your guard of honour. Blanche, who had not understood a word of the conversation, had been about to suggest the man should be invited to eat with them. A searching glance from her magnificent brown eyes had assured her that his fingernails were clean. It might amuse Jack, and there was plenty of food. Jack realized that her intention just in time to prevent her creating fresh opportunities for unraveling this already tangled skein. Trying to sound regretful that the gilded birds must keep their gilded cage, he said firmly, I fear that it might cause undue interest if you came with us, so let the usual boatman row us to the grotto. A second boat must be provided to take him away while we picnic in privacy. I may even decide to bathe. He will return only in time for us to embark on the afternoon steamer. Sorrowful, the captain accepted the royal command. It shall be as you wish, he said with a wistful smile. I cannot come with you, so I send with you my prayers that you take back to England only happy memories of our beautiful Capri. But when they returned that evening to Sorrento, my parents took more than memories with them. They took me. Chapter 2. Darby and Joan. I was born on the 12th of April 1907, the day before Irish's 9th birthday. Okay, it was 207. She had been promised a brother or sister as a birthday present, and having been told that babies are found under gooseberry bushes, had dug a lot of holes in the kitchen garden before I arrived. I did not enjoy being a baby in spite of the care that was lavished on me. Everyone else was too big and I was too small. The louder I yelled, the less they understood what I was trying to say, and if I cried because of a frightening dream, they thought it was wind. My grandfather had died in February after a hunting accident, so when I was 6 weeks old, we went to live with my grandmother, Jenny Marshall, number 2 Primrose Hill Road, a house within lion roar of the London Zoo. Life became more interesting as soon as I was old enough to sit up in my pram, which was often left outside a public house in Kentish Town, while my nanny sat inside and sipped whiskey. She was such a nice woman, Iris told me later, that I used to buy her peppermints and spring onions of Burrows with my pocket money so that mother wouldn't smell whiskey on her breath. She was sacked before you were old enough to remember her because she drank at home too and hid the empty bottles in a spare room chimney. They were found when a fire was lit and it smoked. I can remember the next nanny quite clearly because she was in love with one of the keepers of the monkey house at the zoo. Instead of dull pram rides in Regent's Park, I spent my morning with the chimpanzees, drinking my glass of milk with 2 entirely congenial companions, who sometimes allowed me to bite off their bananas or popped into my mouth a sawdusty grape. My favorite person was Jenny, although I was only taken to see her for an hour after tea. Then the hour with grandmother became shorter and shorter, until I was only allowed to kiss my hand to her round the half-open door. I was 18 months old when, without any warning, or perhaps I was warned when I wasn't listening, the landau took Nanny and me to a railway station, and a train took us to Hayling Island, where father had bought a cottage for me. After a few days, Nanny went back to London, because she wanted to be nearer the zoo, and Nanny Walpole came to look after me. It was Nanny Walpole who told me that my grandmother was dead. The resentment I felt in finding myself trapped in the body of a baby flared up again soon afterwards. Perhaps the long, flat beach, the sand dunes with their harsh, bleached grasses, the restless sound of the sea stirred latent memories in me. It was not always Joanne, but sometimes a Greek boy training to be a runner on a hotter, brighter shore. I knew the feel of his muscles and the ache in them when he had run too hard, the smooth oval of the pebble clenched in each hand as he crouched with his toes on a mark at the start of a race. When the lovely swiftness of a young athlete's body was particularly strong, I used to shout, "Watch me! I can run fast, faster than anyone," and then weep because I could only drive Joan's little body ridiculously slowly across the Hayling sands. I was happier when the rest of the family came to live at Hayling. My cottage only had 2 bedrooms, so they took a furnished house near it. My father built a house large enough for us all. At first, it was only ditches in the 6-acre field adjoining the cottage. Then there were walls low enough to walk along, which soon became taller and could only be climbed by ladders, which I was not allowed to do. When the roof was put on, there was a party for all the workmen, with a very great deal of food on trestle tables and barrels of beer. The house started by being quite an ordinary size, with a dining room, a morning room, and a drawing room facing the sea, and bedrooms, dressing rooms, and nurseries above them for mother and father, Nanny Walpole, and me. Stretching out behind were more bedrooms and bathrooms for Marjorie and Iris and visitors over the servant part of the house. At the end of what was going to be the garden, father had built a real tennis court and a billiard room. One morning I was in the tennis court with father, watching the walls being covered with a special kind of cement. 30 men were working up ladders, and the man who had invented the cement, who was called Mr. Bickley, was there too. Suddenly mother rushed in and shouted, "Out, all of you! The roof is going to fall in!" Everyone stared at her and then looked up at the roof. A glass roof with iron girders that had been put in by a firm which roofed railway stations. It looked perfectly solid, but mother became so angry at not being obeyed that father ordered the men to stop work. So he climbed down the ladders and fired out of the building. For about 5 minutes they stood about, trying not to show that they thought mother was being ridiculous. Mr. Bickley was saying to father that if the walls cracked because the work had been interrupted, he could not be held responsible. Mother was holding me by the arms in case I tried to run back into the court, which I had no intention of doing. Suddenly there was a grinding noise and an enormous crash. Clouds of dust belched out of the openings where the side gallery windows were going to be. "My God, it has fallen," said father. Mr. Bickley looked as though he was going to be sick. Some of the workmen swore under their breath, and I saw 3 of them take off their caps and cross themselves. The only person quite unmoved was mother, who said calmly, "What did I tell you, Jack? You must admit there are advantages in being married to a witch." When the court was mended, there was a party for the opening match and a special train to bring spectators from London. Soon afterwards, father caught a cold while he was walking back through the garden to the house on his way to have a bath after playing tennis. So he decided to build a lot more house to join the 2 bits of sea court together. It was not nearly so easy as it sounds, and took a lot of planning with scale models made out of cigar boxes on the billiard table. "You can pull down the servants' hall," said Mother firmly. "Well, we shall have to move the stoke-hole," said Father. "Nonsense, Jack. I will not do without baths or adequate heating while you reshuffle the plumbing." "But there is no other way of joining the house to the court." He paused for a thought. "I had not intended to build more than a simple addition to the ground floor. But if I were to add an extra coal cellar, a storeroom or two, I should use them to support an upstairs passage." When he began, the upstairs passage ended with a back staircase, one flight leading down to the kitchen quarters, the other up to the attics and the servants' bedrooms. By the time he had finished, there were 5 more spare bedrooms and about 50 yards more passage, with 4 right-angle turns in it. This led to a door into a gallery, with stairs leading down into a music room, which had an alcove overlooking the rose garden that was large enough to contain Jenny's concert grand piano. From the music room a door led into the side gallery of the tennis court. Everyone else was very pleased with the new room, for I was the only one who noticed that it was haunted. While the house was still being built, the field was turning into a garden. There were 5 gardeners and Patrick, the Irish garden boy, who gave me my first puppy. When I first saw the puppy, I thought he was a grown-up dog, because he was already much larger than Mother's Blenheim Spaniels or Iris's Fox Terrier. "He is only 3 months old, Miss Joan," Patrick said proudly. "Won't he be growing into a wonderful great dog and be given the chance? Would you take him for a present now?" The puppy was licking my face, and I wanted him more than I had ever wanted anything. "But he's your puppy, Patrick. You mustn't give him to me. And you don't have him. He'll be killed, surely. So he will. Wouldn't he have been drowned in a sack before his eyes were open if I hadn't bought him for 5 shillings? Vexed my mother was at the sight of him, and now she's taken against the poor dog, though he does no more harm than track a bit of dirt into the kitchen and fluster her chickens. I had to do a lot of persuading before I was allowed to have him. But Nanny Walpole, who had once looked after a child who had been badly bitten by a Pekingese, persuaded Mother that the bigger the dog, the more reliable it would be with children. Father named him Darby, because I was called Joan. He grew and he grew, which was not surprising, as his mother was a Mastiff and his father a Great Dane, until at last he was too big to sleep in the nursery, so a kennel was built for him near the greenhouses. He never went to his kennel except at night, until Nanny Walpole had to go away for 2 months because her sister was ill. A horrible temporary came called Nurse Vincent, who disliked dogs almost more than she disliked children. The only person who got on with her was Lambal, the head gardener, whom I hated, because he was always complaining to Mother that Darby's enormous footprints ruined his seed beds. Nurse Vincent was so bossy that I avoided her as much as possible, and the easiest way of doing so was to hide with Darby in his kennel and refuse to come out. One day she lost her temper and told Lambal to drag me out of it. He pinched my arm and I yelled, so Darby, who was being a lion defending his cub, bit him in the arm. It was not at all a bad bite. Darby wagged his tail to show it was only a warning, but it tore Lambal's shirt and he was furious. The red-faced, angry woman dragged me back to the house and shut me in my room for the rest of the day. Being shut in my room without picture books or toys was the only punishment which was officially allowed. I knew Patrick would remember to take Darby his dinner, so I was not really worried, only bored at wasting an afternoon indoors, until Mother brought my supper and sat cosily on the bed. This was unusual when I was in disgrace, and I began to be suspicious when, after vague generalizations about the importance of little girls learning to be unselfish, she told me that Darby had gone to look after a poor child who loved him even more than I did. The child was a cripple who had no legs. Darby was going to pull her about in a little cart with red wheels, so she could go to the beach. Some little girls are not lucky enough to have a goat cart like yours, she added persuasively. She can have the goat cart and the goat, I said quickly, and dived under the bedclothes. Mother sighed and left me. I lay huddled in the dark cave of blankets, trying to think of a way Darby could be rescued. He must be shut up somewhere before being sent away. Patrick and I would find him, probably chained up without food or water in some horrible shed. We would call and call until he heard us and barked. We would break down the door and Patrick would cut the chain with a hacksaw. Darby would be hungry, so I must remember to steal a joint from the larder on my way out. There was bound to be a tap somewhere, and he was clever at drinking from my cupped hands. We would find somewhere safe from grown-ups, and if any of them came to find us, we would tell Darby to bite them until they ran away. I would explain to him that they needed biting and hard. I escaped from the house before breakfast with a sirloin of beef, which I could hardly carry, and my pockets stuffed with provisions for the journey. I had decided we would go to Iceland, where Patrick said people were kind to dogs, the larger the better. I found him in the stokehole cleaning a spade, a red-eyed Patrick, who told me the dreadful truth. Darby had been shot and Patrick had buried him. Almost as terrible as Darby being dead was thinking that Father given the order for his murder. The only comfort I had in that awful endless day was the discovery that Father had only fallen into the trap of believing a grown-up. Lombard had seen an opportunity for revenge on Darby and me and taken it. He had said that my dog had suddenly turned savage and would have gone for me if he had not come to my rescue. As soon as I told Father what had really happened, he nearly cried he was so sorry and let me listen while he sacked Lombard. I used to visit Darby's grave in the shrubbery and talk to him, not because I thought the real him was still there, because there must be something like a telephone connecting dead bodies with the people who used to live in them. This must be true, for otherwise why did my favorite housemaid go to visit her sister's grave on her day out? She took flowers and used to say, "Poor love, she was ever so fond of peonies, or sweet peas, or whatever the flowers happened to be." Darby had never been fond of flowers, but so that he would not feel in any way neglected, I put some on his grave every day. To be sure he heard me, I lay flat on my face and talked right into the ground. My mouth sometimes got so gritty that I had to rinse it out in the water butt. Then I heard people talking about something which was soon to happen, something to do with flying. "It's coming right over the house," they said, as though it was important. I was only mildly interested until I heard someone say, "It's the Flying Derby." Then I knew why they were excited, but no one was nearly so excited as me. Darby was coming to fetch me. A Darby larger and more beautiful even than before. A Darby with wings on whom I would ride to the real country where we both belonged. Horses sometimes grew wings, for I had seen one called Pegasus in a book, and dogs were much wiser than horses. The days passed so slowly that every hour of them might have been a long, slow hour of afternoon rest. But at last Darby's day came. Trembling with excitement, I stood with lots of other people on that flat roof of Seacourt. "There it is," somebody shouted. Had I remembered everything? Yes, my magic china mouse was in my pocket, and I had said goodbye to my rabbits. There was a black speck dazzling in the eye of the sun. The sun made my eyes water. Or did I really know it was not Darby? I felt tears running down my face. People would see. I must run until I found somewhere to hide before they stopped looking at the flying machine. As I stumbled down the steep wooden stairs which had led to the attic, I heard someone say, "What a difficult child. Too much excitement. She must be overtired." So I finished this here at chapter 2. The next chapter is chapter 3, Words and Music. Have a lovely Thursday. We're drumming tonight on our cliff top.